My name is Amara Bennett, and I never thought a 7-year-old's whisper would unravel a billion-dollar engagement party. But that night, on a rooftop in Manhattan with 300 guests holding crystal flutes of champagne and a woman in a $20,000 gown smiling for the cameras, my son Eli looked up at the man he hadn't seen in 2 years and said 8 words that stopped the room cold. To understand how we got there, I have to take you back, all the way back. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, raised by my grandmother Pearl after my mama passed when I was 9. Grandma Pearl taught me 3 things: how to pray, how to keep my back straight when the world tried to bend it, and how to cook. Lord, how she taught me to cook. She used to say food was just memory you could taste. Her gumbo could make a grown man cry. Her cornbread could make a stranger feel like family. I carried those recipes north when I was 25, chasing a man who promised me the world and gave me a son instead. Eli's father left before our boy could say dada, walked out one Tuesday morning with a duffel bag and a lie about needing to find himself. I never heard from him again. I cried for about a week, then I dried my eyes, looked at my baby boy, and got to work. By the time Eli was 4, I had built a little reputation as a private chef in the New York food circles. That's how I ended up at the Hawthorne estate out in the Hamptons. The job came through a friend of a friend, live-in position, private chef and household manager. The pay was better than anything I'd ever seen on paper, and it came with a small cottage on the property where I could raise my son. The Hawthorne family was old money turned new. Daniel Hawthorne, 38 years old, white American, blonde-haired and blue-eyed and built like a man who used to row crew at Harvard. He'd inherited a respectable fortune and turned it into an empire, Hawthorne Capital, with offices in 6 countries. On paper, he was everything you'd expect: a billionaire, a name in the Wall Street Journal, a face on the cover of Forbes. But the man I met when I started that job wasn't any of those things. The man I met was a widower. His wife, Catherine, had died in a sailing accident 2 years before I was hired. She was 34. They'd been trying for a baby. After she died, Daniel buried himself in work the way some men bury themselves in liquor. 18-hour days, red-eye flights, anything to keep from being alone in that big house with all those rooms she decorated. The first time I really saw him, not the billionaire, but the man, was about 3 months into the job. It was 1 a.m. I'd come down to the kitchen for a glass of water, and there he was, still in his suit, eating cold leftover risotto straight out of the container with a fork. He looked up at me, embarrassed, and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett, I didn't mean to disturb you." I said, "Mr. Hawthorne, that risotto's 3 days old. Sit down, let me make you something." He sat. I made him a grilled cheese sandwich with the sharp cheddar I keep for emergencies and a bowl of tomato soup from scratch. He ate every bite. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "That's the first real meal I've had in months." I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything started. Over the next year, Daniel started coming home earlier. He started eating at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room nobody used. And Eli, my sweet, brave, curious little boy, started gravitating toward him. One Sunday morning, Eli climbed right up into his lap while he was reading the paper. I nearly snatched him off. I was sure I was about to get fired. But Daniel just smiled, handed him the comics section, and read them out loud in funny voices until Eli was howling with laughter. I stood in the doorway with a dish towel in my hand, watching him, and something in my chest cracked open that I'd nailed shut a long time ago. Daniel started doing little things. He brought home a book of children's poetry one Friday and left it on the counter in case Eli wanted it. He took my boy fishing on the dock one Saturday morning. He showed up to Eli's kindergarten graduation when I was catering a charity gala and couldn't be there. He sat in the back row in a $5,000 suit, clapped louder than anybody, and brought my son home with a juice box and a paper crown. And Eli started calling him Mr. D. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a man like Daniel Hawthorne was just being kind to the help. I told myself I was a black single mother from Charleston with a son and a chef's coat, and he was a white American billionaire with 3 penthouses and a yacht. I told myself a lot of things. And then the storm came. It was a Tuesday in October. A nor'easter knocked the power out around 9 at night. I was in the kitchen lighting candles when Daniel came in, soaked from running across the lawn from the garage. He sat down at the island, and for the first time in all those months, we talked. He told me about Catherine, about how they'd met in college, how she used to sing off-key in the shower, how he still couldn't bring himself to give away her clothes. I told him about my mama, about Eli's father, about Grandma Pearl and the gumbo, and how I learned to keep my back straight. At some point, the candles burned down low, and he looked at me across the island and said, "Amara, you make this house feel alive again." I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because I knew what was happening between us, and I knew what it will cost me. The next morning in the garden, he almost reached for my hand. I stepped back. I said, "Mr. Hawthorne, I have a son to raise. I can't be a story people whisper about at brunch." He nodded. He said, "I understand. I won't ask again unless you want me to." But that afternoon, there was a new book on the kitchen counter, a hardcover collection of Lucille Clifton's poetry, my grandmother's favorite poet. I had mentioned her name once, in passing, 3 months earlier. He had remembered. I cried quietly while I seasoned the lamb that night, and I let myself, for the first time, love him back. For a year, we lived inside something secret and beautiful, nothing scandalous, nothing the tabloids would have known what to do with, just quiet dinners after Eli went to bed, long walks on the beach when his staff was off, a kiss on the forehead in the kitchen on my birthday. He told me once, "Amara, I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know that you and Eli are the only 2 people in this world who see me." And then his business took him to Singapore. It was supposed to be 6 weeks. It became 6 months. The texts got shorter, the calls got rarer, then they stopped. I told myself a billionaire's attention is a candle in the wind. I told myself I should have known better. I told myself Grandma Pearl didn't raise me to wait by a phone. So I quit. I gave my notice through the estate manager, packed up our little cottage, took Eli, and moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. I got a job as the lead chef for a high-end catering company in Manhattan. I changed my phone number. I deleted my old email. I buried that love the way I'd buried my mama, with grace and without explanation. 2 years passed. Eli turned 7. He was in 2nd grade, sharp as a tack, with a gap-toothed smile and a habit of asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy? Mommy, do you remember Mr. D? When are we going to see him again?" I would change the subject. I would make him grilled cheese. I would tuck him in and sit on the edge of his bed until he fell asleep, and then I would go into the bathroom and cry where he couldn't hear me. And then one Tuesday morning in March, I opened the New York Times and I saw the headline, "Hawthorne Capital CEO Daniel Hawthorne engaged to Connecticut heiress Vivian Castellan." The photograph was glossy. Vivian was tall, blonde, beautiful in that polished finishing school way. She had her hand on his chest, showing off a diamond the size of a marble. Daniel was smiling, but I knew that smile. It was the smile he used to give the board members, the one that didn't reach his eyes. The engagement party was set for 6 weeks later. Manhattan rooftop, 300 guests, the kind of party that ends up in Vogue. I closed the paper. I made Eli's breakfast. I went to work. I did not cry. I had cried enough. 2 weeks before the party, my boss called me into her office. We'd just landed a $40,000 catering contract for a high-profile engagement. I was being assigned as lead chef. She slid the client folder across her desk. I opened it. Hawthorne Castellan Engagement Soiree. I sat there for a full minute. My boss said, "Amara, are you all right? You went pale." I said, "I'm fine. I'll handle it." I thought about Eli's tuition. I thought about the down payment I'd been saving for a little house in Bed-Stuy. I thought about Grandma Pearl, who used to say, "A strong back carries what a weak back drops." I said yes. 1 week before the party, Vivian came to the catering office for the menu tasting. She walked in wearing a white cashmere coat and dark sunglasses she didn't take off. She was charming to my boss. She was charming to the event planner. She looked right through me. When I served her the amuse-bouche, she corrected my pronunciation. When I described the second course, she asked the event planner, not me, the planner, "And where did you say this chef is from, originally?" I smiled. I said, "Charleston, ma'am, South Carolina." She said, interesting. And then she turned to the planner and said, "Make sure the kitchen staff stays in the kitchen during the event. Daniel hates a chaotic presence on the floor." I nodded. I went back to plating. Inside, something old and tired stood up and stretched. The day of the party arrived. I had arranged for my cousin Renee to keep Eli overnight in Queens. At 3 in the afternoon, Renee called me crying. Her car had broken down on the BQE. She was waiting for a tow. She couldn't take him. I had no other options. My boss was already texting me that the kitchen was a mess and I needed to get there an hour early. So I brought Eli with me. I set him up in the staff break room 2 floors below the rooftop with a tablet, a pair of headphones, a peanut butter sandwich, and his book about dinosaurs. I knelt down and looked him dead in the eyes. "Eli Bennett, listen to Mommy. You do not come out of this room for anything. I will come check on you every hour. You stay right here." He said, "Yes, Mommy." I kissed his forehead. I went upstairs to cook. The rooftop was breathtaking. String lights, a jazz quartet, white orchids on every table, 300 of New York's wealthiest people in tuxedos and gowns. Vivian floated through the crowd in ivory silk, glowing, accepting kisses on the cheek from senators' wives in museum board chairs. And through the pass-through window of the kitchen, I saw Daniel. He was thinner than I remembered. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. He was shaking hands and smiling for photographs, but every time he thought no one was looking, the smile slid off his face like water. My hands shook once. I steadied them. I plated the second course. Around 9, the toasts began. Vivian's father, a silver hair with a Yale class ring, stood up and talked about 2 great families uniting. Vivian's college roommate called her the most graceful woman in any room. A senator's wife took the microphone and said, "Daniel, my dear, it's so wonderful to see you smiling again." I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a tray of canapés, and I felt the strangest, hollowest ache. Like watching a life you almost had get celebrated by strangers who didn't know your name. And then Eli came up the stairs. I don't know how he found his way to the rooftop. He'd gotten bored, he told me later, and he wanted to find Mommy. He pushed open the service door and stepped out onto the rooftop in his little blue sneakers and his dinosaur t-shirt, and his eyes swept the crowd. And they landed on Daniel. Eli's whole face lit up like Christmas morning. "Mr. D!" He shouted it across 300 people in evening gowns. The jazz quartet kept playing for a few more seconds before the cellist noticed something was wrong and trailed off. Heads turned. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Daniel turned. I will never, as long as I live, forget the look on that man's face. He dropped to one knee right there in his tuxedo on the polished rooftop floor. Eli ran to him, sprinted across the floor, and threw his little arms around Daniel's neck. Daniel hugged him back like a man who had been drowning for 2 years and just found dry land. I came out of the kitchen at that exact moment. I was still holding the tray. I froze in the doorway. Vivienne walked over with her practiced smile. She bent down a little, the way rich women do when they're being gracious to children, and she said, "Darling, who is this adorable little boy?" Daniel couldn't speak. His eyes were wet. He was just holding my son and looking at his face. Eli pulled back and looked at Vivienne. Then he looked back at Daniel. Then he looked at Vivienne again, and his little forehead wrinkled the way it does when he's working something out. And he said, clear as a church bell, loud enough for the front row to hear, "She doesn't make you laugh like Mommy does." 300 people stopped talking at the exact same second. Vivienne's smile cracked right down the middle. Daniel slowly stood up, still holding Eli's hand, and his eyes swept the rooftop, searching, and they found me standing in the kitchen doorway in my chef's whites with a tray of canapés in my hands. Someone somewhere dropped a glass. The jazz quartet did not start playing again. Daniel started walking. He walked past Vivienne. He walked past her father. He walked past the senator. He walked across that entire rooftop with my son's hand in his, straight to me. And when he got to me, he said, loud enough for every single person on that rooftop to hear, "I went to Singapore to close the deal that would let me come home and stop being a billionaire with a calendar. I wanted to come back as a man with time, a real partner, a real father. I came back, Amara. I came back and you were gone. I hired a lawyer. I looked for you for a year." The whole rooftop was silent. He turned to face the crowd. He said, "I owe everyone here an apology, especially Vivienne. I should never have tried to build a life with someone I'm not in love with. I'm sorry." Vivienne didn't say a word. She set down her champagne flute very carefully on a passing waiter's tray. She turned and she walked off that rooftop with her chin in the air. Her father followed her. Half a dozen of her closest friends followed him. Daniel turned back to me. His eyes were full. He said, "I didn't know how to find you. I didn't know you quit. By the time I came home, the estate manager had your forwarding address as a P.O. box that you closed 2 months later. I gave up 6 months ago. I let my mother introduce me to Vivienne because I thought I would never feel anything again." I finally found my voice. It came out small. I said, "Daniel, I am not falling into your arms on a rooftop in front of 300 people. I have a son, I have a job, I have a heart that's been broken once already, and I'm not handing it back to you tonight." He nodded. He said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need us to do this right this time, slow, like people, not like a headline." He said, "Whatever you need, as long as you need." He knelt down and looked Eli in the eye. He said, "Is that okay with you, buddy?" Eli thought about it very seriously. Then he said, "Only if you come to my soccer game on Saturday. We're playing the Tigers, and they're really good." Daniel laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep, the kind I hadn't heard from him in 2 years, the kind I used to make him do back in that kitchen on the Hamptons estate when nobody was watching. He said, "I'll be there, Eli, front row." The party ended early. I went back to the kitchen and finished my shift because I am Grandma Pearl's granddaughter and I do not leave a job half done. Daniel waited for me at the service entrance for 3 hours in his tuxedo, holding my son's hand while Eli ate a slice of cake on a paper plate. People ask me sometimes if I was angry that it took a 7-year-old to say what nobody else on that rooftop had the courage to say. They ask me if I was embarrassed, if I was hurt, if I was triumphant. I wasn't any of those things, because children don't see net worth. They don't see the dress or the rooftop or the 300 guests. They don't see the headlines or the gossip columns or the engagement ring the size of a marble. They see who makes their daddy laugh. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the only one in there telling the whole truth. My name is Amara Bennett. That was the night my son gave me my life back. And we did do it slow this time. We did do it right. But that's a story for another day.